Think and Grow Rich, Chapter 6, Organised Planning. So in this episode, we're going to discuss his instructions of how to build practical plans. The first quote that I'd like to take from this is, "No individual has sufficient experience, education, native ability, and knowledge to ensure the accumulation of a great fortune without the cooperation of other people." And he says, if the first plan fails, then we plan again. And if that fails, we plan again until it works. So this is all about perseverance. We discussed temporary failure earlier, and that's where we found that most people quit. But temporary defeat isn't permanent failure unless you allow it to be. If you remember, Thomas Edison actually failed over 10,000 times before he perfected the electric light bulb. Temporary failure just essentially means that that plan that you're on is not sound. We've got a couple of quotes now. "No man is ever whipped until he quits in his own mind. And a quitter never wins, and a winner never quits." And Napoleon Hill says that every follower of this philosophy will experience temporary defeats along the way. He's introduced the concept of the mastermind group, and that was sort of the subject, if you like, of that first quote I gave, and it will be covered in later episodes. He then goes on to say that some people believe only money can make money, but that's not true. And we've already covered 5 of the steps of the process where money is made. Because money in and of itself is nothing but inert matter. Practically, he says, all great fortunes begin by selling either an idea or a personal service. So essentially, we're all salespeople. And he says there are 2 types of people, leaders and followers. Most remain as followers and get paid as such. Most leaders start as followers, but they learn to learn from the leaders in order to climb up the ranks and become a leader themselves and get paid as a leader. He then goes on to define 11 of the attributes that he thinks are the attributes of a leader. Just going to list a few of them. So courage, self-control, a keen sense of justice, definiteness of decision and plans, etc. He then goes on to define 2 types of leadership. The first is by consent, and the second is by force. We're all familiar with the concept of dictators who lead by force, and we discussed Gandhi and the power that he had of leadership by consent. And as we also said, power beats force every time, over time. He then goes on to discuss the 10 major causes of failure in leadership. Again, just a selection of some of those. We've got the fear of competition from followers. They wish to get paid for what they know instead of what they do with that knowledge. We've got disloyalty and things like emphasis on status. He then goes to talk about the opportunities arising after the Depression and how to write a CV. He then comes back to what we've discussed before and uses the example of the employer and employee working together to serve the public efficiently and not drive bargains to their detriment, because he says that's what led to the Depression. And that's exactly what we're seeing currently with the strikes, etc., which are damaging public opinion. Because he says essentially the philosophy of the time was essentially to try to get without giving. So we come to another quote here, and something which he calls QQS. By that, he's talking about the quality, quantity, and spirit in this context. Every person must be his own salesman of personal services. The quality and the quantity of service rendered and the spirit in which it is rendered determine to a large extent the price and the duration of employment. And Napoleon Hill reckoned that the day of the go-getter had passed. It's now the day of the go-giver. He then moves on to say that he's not actually moralising, but, and this is quite a revealing quote, if you like, he says there is something radically wrong with a civilization and a system of education which permit 98% of the people to go through life as failures. He then goes in to discuss what he says are the 30 major causes of failure. And again, just to list a few, procrastination is one of them. And that's usually linked to the underlying self-belief of not being good enough. And that I have to hold my hand up of being my major cause for taking so long to start with this project. Because although I'm passionate to share this with people, and if it helps just one person, then it would have been worth it, there was that underlying issue. Am I good enough? Who's going to listen to me? And should it be done by a professional? Some other causes of failure: lack of ambition, lack of life purpose, and the desire of something for nothing. Again, in this chapter, he comes up with 28 self-analysis questions. And they are faults, if you like, which he says we should analyse on at least an annual basis, and we should see those number of faults reducing annually. He then goes on to discuss how capitalism has, well, as he wrote this back in published it back in 1937, how it enables the freedom that was enjoyed and still is enjoyed in America today, but it's obviously more relevant around the world as well. So he discusses how many millions of dollars circulate when people there pay for merchandise, and that production, transportation gives employment to millions of men and women around the world who then recirculate those dollars. And the last quote we have from this chapter is, "Freedom does not and cannot bring riches without effort. There is one dependable method of accumulating and legally holding riches, and that is by the rendering of useful service. No system has ever been created by which men can legally acquire riches through mere force of numbers or without giving in return an equivalent value of one form or another." And this, he says, is the principle known as the law of economics. And this law of economics was passed by nature, and it gives rewards for its observance, but penalties for its violation.